Hey guys, and welcome to Out of the Whale podcast, where our goal is to equip, edify, and bring unity to the body of Christ. All right, hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Out of the Whale, where we are actually going to be talking about conveniences and what that looks like in our walk as a Christian, and just to kind of get your mind thinking about these things. I think a lot of times what we do is we just do things because that's just the way life goes, and you're just doing things to do things. And this is not to judge anybody, if you do some of the things we mention or don't do some of the things that we mention or whatever the case may be. It's just to get you to think about it and kind of share our testimony on where the Lord led us and brought us when it came to certain conveniences. So just keep that in mind. This is just to get you thinking like, maybe I don't think about that. Maybe I am just doing that because it's every day. And is this something that maybe I'm just taking the easy way out of because that's just what I've always done? And can I not make it harder on yourself, but maybe look into, I've always wanted to do XYZ, but it is a sacrifice and it's going to be harder. But kind of deep diving into what that looks like, and especially in the world today where everything is a convenience. It's comfort and ease, and that's really a play on our flesh to be, I don't want to say lazy, but more relaxed. And
and there's kind of a mixture of like the idle way of thinking or living or acting, and then there's also like a mix of conviction in there as well, and like things that maybe like we necessarily shouldn't dive into as a believer, right? Like we shouldn't blend in that kind of thing with certain conveniences. But I mean, as you know, Chloe, I definitely have there's just something in me for some reason that turns away from conveniences. I like to be troubled for some reason. And it's not like because I want to say this too, like not we're not seeking hardship,
right? No,
and we're not suggesting that anybody seeks hardship.
Definitely not.
But there is like there's something that we're seeing in society alone where it's just like everyone's flocking to the easy road,
right? Right.
So it's kind of more in that direction,
which is kind of like when we look at it in that perspective too, like they're flocking towards the easy route. Nowadays you really don't have to think, you ask questions and you are almost ostracized basically for asking certain questions. And it's not even to start anything, it's just to be like, hey, something just seems weird to me, can somebody explain this? And nobody can give an explanation, they just get angry. And it's like, okay, well, that just makes the red flag even redder, because why, if it's a legit thing, where's the explanation, where's the truth behind it? So and that's just across the board, but these conveniences. So a few questions that we wanted to kind of, this is again what the Lord has led us through and still to this day. And there's going to be seasons for everything. So some seasons it may be like it's a season of rest, and he's like, no, use the conveniences that I've put here, it's okay. But some things to kind of look at when you're looking at your life and what's going on. One, obviously, is the Lord convicting you? And have you brought these things before the Lord? Do you feel him pulling you towards something that maybe you're scared of because it is harder? But certain things, it's why, why do we need to be cautious when it comes to certain conveniences? And I think it's just with that, it's why are you using it? Is it okay, well, I need to use this in this season because I'm trying to get more of this, maybe more family time. So I'm going to use, I don't know. We were talking the other day about HEB curbside, me and a friend. And so, right now she's in a season where she said she needs to use it because she's valuing her time. And we've been through seasons like that where we value the time. So it's like, it's easy to just do the curbside and that's it. And so that's not a bad thing at all, but it's one of those like, why are you using it? When are you using it? And that was just the example. It's really kind of a minor one. That's
Right.
not even HEB curbside's, not even that big of a
Right.
deal. But that's just the example of like, what are you getting out of it? Why are you using it? Is it to take the easy road out just because you're struggling with, I just don't want to deal with anything. I don't want to do anything. Or is it like, no, this is going to bring fruit to our family.
And obviously, a grocery store curbside order is not like detrimental to your faith or these type of things, but it's just this whole, again, like a whole community type like world event that's going on of like, we're leaning on conveniences more than we ever have.
Yeah.
And not just because technology is advancing, but like there is like this idle, again, I keep using that idle thinking, like we're just doing it because it's there in a sense. And it's not necessarily that it's harmful, once again, but is it really that beneficial,
right,
that like we're now glued to these things? We now, I mean, in a sense, worship these things.
Yeah. And I feel like the curbside maybe wasn't the best idea. That's just the first thing that came to my mind.
I mean, yeah, and like
just the seasons of things.
I talk about my phone quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like my phone is my way in. When people see the light phone, they're like, "What is this thing?" You know what I mean? And it's just this. I felt like I was neutralizing my brain in a sense. I don't need to remember anything.
Right.
I have a calendar. I have directions. I have a Bible. I have Google. So there's no sense of like I need to memorize anything or I need to just use my brain in any way. I have this device to lean on. And then not only that, but it's a distraction at my fingertips
in there,
at
for
any moment.
Definitely.
So why would I want to read something when I can, that kind of is more of the conviction side of things. But
for sure.
I felt convicted in the sense of, we don't even have social interaction anymore. You know,
right?
What I mean? Like,
it's all through.
It's all this digital, digitized stuff.
Yes.
And so that was kind of my.
Well, so I don't have a light phone. I still have a smartphone, but I don't have social media.
Mm-hmm.
You are out of the loop on 90% of what's going on. You have no idea. And it sucks because it's like, people post things and like, you didn't know? And it's like, no. They're like, well, I put it on Instagram 5 months ago. And it's like, I don't have Instagram. And it just kind of takes that personal relationship with, which there's a convenience, right? You can just share the news with everybody, right? And that's a wonderful thing. So there is a good aspect to it. You're not having to like tell 500 people, hey, this is what's going on in my life. But then there's also that downside where it's not really personal and you don't have to have conversations with people to hear what's going on, to get that update. And that can take a lot of that personal relationship, that fellowship time, or even ministry time away. Right. So again, it's just being cautious with those conveniences, making sure that, we're not neglecting those other areas because you can only get so much from that, Sure.
Yeah. And also just one thing that was just coming to my mind right here was like the idea of like, if we go too far onto the convenience side, like we're here, right? What is it? First world country. We're in America, right? So we don't really like, I've talked about this before of like, we don't have like a good testing period of our faith in a sense.
It's true.
Because we have so much at our fingertips. We have food at every single corner.
God's our plan B.
Yeah.
Because we have plan A.
We have all these other things to put our trust in and everything.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about other countries or, other places around the world that aren't as,
it's literally like if God doesn't show up, they have nothing.
Right. Like we're blessed to have all this. Don't get me wrong. Like we're blessed to have food.
Yeah,
in our grocery stores. We're blessed to have fast food, even have that an option, even though it's horrible, but it's an option, right? But like what happens, like we think because we have it at abundance, we think that we can't live without it.
Right.
And that's like where I see the danger and convenience of we're leaning so hard on this that it's literally our lifeline.
Yeah.
But what happens if that was to be removed? You know what I mean? What happens if, as dramatic as it may sound, what happens if we don't have electricity? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we rely on,
we have no idea.
We think we need AC to survive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where obviously that's not the case.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of like my portion
Yeah.
of the convenience.
Well, and that makes me think too, like of all, it's really the Old Testament stories at any time. You know, they were like, I'm thinking of Babylon, and I don't know what was going on in First Kings, but needless to say, what they do is they are not First Kings. I'm sorry, Second Kings. First Kings was the other one, but in Second Kings, where he's talking about the food, you know, and which we'll get into that, but it's always about that. You know, they strip away
the
conveniences. Like you see that in the Old Testament, and it's like history repeats itself. We know that. The Bible tells us there's nothing new. It's going to be repetitive. And so when we look at the end times that we're facing, you know, we have to understand that the devil doesn't play games, and he doesn't like Christians. He don't like you. He don't like your family. He don't like anything about you. He hates you.
He wants to kill you.
He wants to kill you. And so what is he going to do? You know, he's going to play on those things that he knows, like we're so fluffy, cushy, comfortable. Like we can't even go to church on a Sunday because the Cowboys are playing, or because maybe it's 10 minutes farther down the road, you know, and
or in our case, we don't have a paved parking lot, you know?
Yeah.
There's just things that...
There's things, yeah. And it's like, man, like, how in the world are we going to survive the end times if we can't even do that, you know? And I think that the Lord is really, you know, he's cleaning house for sure. Mm-hmm. And it has to be done because it's like we have to be in unity. We have to all want the same thing and understand the same thing, because we're with that kind of mindset, we're never going to make it to the end, because we're going to be like, I can't get my Starbucks, right. You know? And it's like, we need to understand that we can still use all of those things. Don't get me wrong. Because the Lord put them there and he put us in the position. So I don't believe that it's wrong to use them. I think though, if you're solely relying on them, and maybe have that mindset of saying like, well, I'm going to use it for now because we have it, you know, but understand that this isn't foolproof, and that there might come a time where we have to say bye to it. And if it's one of those things where you're like, well, I don't know if I could let it go, deal with it now. He's giving you that chance. He's giving you that opportunity. And we kind of talked about that. Like we've been through kind of a dry season, I suppose would be the best way to explain it, over the past few months. And, you know, it really opened our eyes of like, wow, we're not ready. And I said, praise God that he's showing us that right now, when really nothing bad is happening.
Yeah.
And we don't, you know, how am I going to say it? Like, we're not going to fall away. You know, he's giving us that chance to say, hey, look, yeah, there's some weaknesses. You guys aren't ready, and that we need to prepare for that. And I'm not saying, I have no idea where it's going to go, but you just don't know. There's going to be times in your walk and in your faith that you're going to be tested. And so we just want to make sure that we're cautious when we're using these things, because the devil's going to use them, because our flesh craves comfort and desires that. And we are in such a heavy time of convenience and comfort and what makes us feel happy.
Yep.
You know, even if it's only like 30 seconds of temporary happiness, right?
And that's the beauty of it, the temporary portion of it. Like we think, again, the physical feels so physical. The physical feels so real. We see it, right? And we think that that's it. We, you know, like that's the lie that we believe, is that we think that this is it. We think that everything that we have, the temporal pleasures, are all that we need and all that we have. But like, there is trials that come, right? And it's all part of the testing. It's the sanctification process. They're being, you know, the Peter says that we're being purified like metals, like precious metals. He's bringing us through either stripping away certain things or removing certain things. I guess that's kind of the same terminology, but he's removing things to make us stronger, right? That old saying, Kelly Clarkson, I think. Is that her name? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right?
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That's the whole thing. And I was thinking too, like Jesus says in John 16 that, you know, he uses the analogy of the woman giving labor. And that's the whole portion, right? Like it's not necessarily like the most comfortable experience.
Right.
I haven't given birth, of course, but Chloe has.
Well, that's actually something I wanted to talk about. That was one of the conveniences I had listed was an epidural for childbirth. Listen, both my kids, I had an epidural. Okay, why? It's easy. It's comfortable. But with this most recent pregnancy, I've been very convicted by that. Of just because it's easy and comfortable doesn't mean that that's the right path to take. And I think I was having a conversation with somebody and they were saying like their doctor kind of had the attitude of why wouldn't you want to have an epidural when it's makes it easy and comfortable, right? And that kind of like is what convicted me of like, wow, we do it because it's there, it's easy. And like I said, I've had two. They were great, but it's one of those things, just taking that easy way out because it's just there and you're not actually giving yourself an opportunity to experience what the Lord has for you. Like with childbirth, like they didn't used to not have medication. It was like, that was it. You just dealt with it. And, they relied on the Lord. And so I think that's just an important thing to think about. Are we doing it just because that's just what we've always, it's because it's there, it's readily available and you're not even giving a thought, which is where I was with this. I'm not even giving a thought to anything else because you're like, no, it's there. Why wouldn't I use it? And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing per se, but just to actually think about your actions and what you're using those conveniences for and that sort of thing.
Yep. And the beautiful part about the analogy is
Yes.
the new creation that's coming out of it, right? So there's pain, there's suffering, but the point is that the woman does not remember the pain and suffering that she went through because new life has come out of it. There's been a birth of life. And that is more joyful than the previous trials and pain that she once had.
Right.
And that's the story of our sanctification.
Yeah.
Is and again, we're in America here, so this is such a blessing that we have to like forcefully have self-control against TikTok. You know what I mean? Like just little things like this. Praise God that we have the opportunity.
Right.
To have those issues, right? But all of these things, they're either distracting us, taking time out of what we could be doing, or just flooding our mind with clutter. That's another thing, or just completely removing our thinking at all. Definitely. You know what I mean?
I wanted to circle back before we get, got kind of far, but
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I wanted to circle back to the Second Kings portion, because I think it's important to, like, there's a biblical example of this happening.
Yeah.
I mean, there's multiple, but this is the one we're going to use. So welcome to it. Yeah. If you have more, wonderful for you. This is just what we got. But, if you want to set up kind of the backstory of what was going on.
Yeah, so in 2 Kings 18, and it's also mentioned in Isaiah 36, it kind of talks about Hezekiah's reign of over Judah, and Assyria actually comes to attack, basically. And whoever the Assyrian guy was, there's a bunch of names. You can read it. It's very good. But basically, they send messages over the walls, so they're shouting over the walls past the warriors, past the watchmen, and it's going to the civilians of the city who are inside of the city, and they're basically threatening them, saying, "Your God can't survive. I've destroyed many different nations who had many different other gods. Your God's no different." And he gives them a temptation to open up the gates.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of read it because I think this is an important piece to capture, because this is certainly the devil speaking, and we can see this even when he tempts Jesus in the wilderness when he was, fasting for 40 days. So he was obviously starving. What was the first thing he tempted him with? Was food, right? So we have to be obviously cautious, and especially in a country that, and I myself love food. Okay, so this is preaching a message, preaching a message for myself. But it says, but Sennacherib's chief of staff replied, "Do you think my master sent this message only to you and your master? He wants all the people to hear it. For when we put this city under siege, they will suffer along with you. They will be so hungry and thirsty that they will eat their own dung and drink their own urine." Then the chief of staff stood and shouted in Hebrew to the people on the wall, "Listen to this message from the great king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Don't let Hezekiah deceive you. He will never be able to rescue you from my power. Don't let him fool you into trusting in the Lord by saying the Lord will surely rescue us. The city will never fall into the hands of the Assyrian king. Don't listen to Hezekiah. These are the terms the king of Assyria is offering. Make peace with me. Open the gates and come out. Then each of you can continue eating from your own grapevine and fig tree, drinking from your own well. Then I will arrange to take you to another land like this one, a land of grain and new wine, bread and vineyards, olive groves and honey. Choose life instead of death." Tell me that ain't the devil. I mean, and look at like when I read that, I was like, we have to read this out loud because that is crazy. I mean, that is literally what he does. He's like, Jesus can't save you. Come with me. Literally selling your soul for the temporary conveniences, right? So he's saying the Lord can't save you, but I can. You're hungry. I have what you want. And what do? You trade the temporal for the eternal.
And in the end times, that will be what I do believe, that the devil doesn't have any new tricks. He will repeat himself. That will be the temptation that he brings to us. You know what I mean? Like I can't unsee this, like this idea of there's that crossroads, right, where we have to decide whether to stand on the word or to fall, and there is a time and a war that will be waged against the saints. We know that's coming.
That's I feel like this is a really good, because
in a sense, like,
example.
Okay, this is where I'm kind of getting at, and this is not like crazy end times. We're not making a massive end times episode here, but I'm just like, it's almost like we're being groomed in a sense to fall to a temptation like this.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like this is kind of what we're gonna see when it comes to the Antichrist.
Right.
Like we see it. There's the Antichrist spirit throughout the Bible, and so you read about it, and again, like you said, he's not new. It's not going to be anything new. It's just going to be on a greater level. And I do think that where we are with the internet and everything, that's going to play such a huge role on why we can be so connected. And we could go into like our theories on end times and stuff. That'll be a different episode, but
sounds fun.
I think it's just so crazy because it's like he's trying to push that fear on them, and so it's the fear and then the temptation for the temporal. And is this the one where he lays out the he lays out the letters, and he's like, Lord, do you see what they're saying? But what do you say? And so I think that's important when it comes to those things. But just again, those conveniences, that's where he's going to use that to tempt you, and we have to be careful and just have our radars on of our Holy Spirit radars,
and kind of on the personal level too, like where we've been led, kind of the garden, right? Like we've I mean, we don't know what we're doing, don't get me wrong, but we've started a garden in our backyard. We have chickens in our backyard, and it's all kind of in the same pool as this. What we're speaking about here is just like, it's easier to go to the store and get eggs, and it's easier to buy vegetables. And
I wouldn't say it's easier to go to the store to get eggs. You just walk out there.
Well, yeah, but
you have to like drive.
You build
to the
a
store.
coop, you feed the chickens, you raise them for months. It's way easier because once again, it's temporary, right? So we get to just quickly go to the store.
Yeah, that's true.
I need a potato. I don't have to wait for it to grow. I don't need to, you know what I mean?
You don't have to plan that.
Exactly.
To make sure you have enough.
But there is something beautiful in the work that's involved. And that's one thing that stuck out to us for the gardening portion of it, is like, well, that's how it was designed.
Yeah.
Adam was working in the garden. So it's like, and again, we don't know what we're doing, but just experiencing our hands getting dirty, planting seeds, and
he
watching
doesn't
it
ask
grow.
you to know what you're doing.
Right. But it's a beautiful thing. Like, to go back to the roots of where we're at, and it's kind of in the same like idea of like just being still, just listening, being quiet, where once again, there's so much noise and there's so much words and sound, and it's like, if we go outside and we're digging a hole and putting a tree in it, it's like that's
Yeah.
That it's just there's something
Yeah.
about it. I don't have the words to describe it, but there's
Yeah.
something about just doing the work, doing
Definitely.
the work.
Well, and I wanted to talk about that too. At the same time that was happening, we were being convicted too about um entertainment.
Mhm.
So we had a TV in our living room and then we got rid of it. Um because I remember feeling convicted about it, and it was one of those I didn't want to give up in a way, because I was like, well, but what? And then I just remember the Holy Spirit telling me, do you want your kids watching it all day?
Mhm.
I was like, no, not really. And at the time we hadn't really figured out the whole TV thing. We do have one TV in our house, but it's in our office, which is where we work. We both work from home. And so it's monitored highly, and the kids really, they like it as background noise more than anything.
Chaos, little
Chaos,
burgers.
yeah, but for the most part they're not, unless they're like super tired. But speaking on that with the kids, like that was a conviction we had. It's easy, and we see this a lot. It's easy to give your kid an iPad because it'll distract them and they'll be on it all day. But what we experienced, like, we would be like, okay, well, he can only have it for like 20 minutes a day. Even in those 20 minutes, I mean, I don't know, it's demonic. I don't know. But
It's literally taking away an addict's
yeah. Like,
needle.
he would have this withdrawal. And I've talked to other parents who said the same thing. They're like, we can't give it to him anymore. And it's, but there's some parents out there that do give it to them. And I understand it's easier to do that. But in the long run, what does that do?
Mhm.
Right? When we're taking the easy way out with our kids, and sometimes you have to, I totally get it. Sometimes you're like, we're just trying to survive the next 10 minutes. I get it. Right? You do what you have to. There's times where you're just like, here, I don't care, whatever. But when you have the opportunity to take the time,
Mhm.
and can you make more time in your day to make sure that you're making that a priority? Because speaking on the iPad, there's so many kids who have delayed speeches and, different mental health disorders or behavioral disorders. I'm not saying like, oh, it's the iPad, but it is interesting that that's what they're watching all day.
Mhm. And it's like almost normal now.
It's almost normal. And again, not judging any parent that does that.
No.
It's just one of those like, hey, is this better in the long run? What is this going to do for them in the long run? Can I make these sacrifices? Like, when you become a parent, you're signing up to sacrifice. Like, we were just talking about this. I don't really think, this is my opinion, but I don't think there's any greater sanctification necessarily than
That's for sure.
parenting. Because if you have small children, or just children in general, they're their own people with their own thoughts and their own feelings, and they do things that you're like, why would you do that? But that's how the Lord looks at us too, and he's not taking the easy way out with us. He's like, no, you can do it. You can do hard things. Yeah. You can do hard things. And so just being cautious. The iPad's just like one example, but I think that there's a lot of things we can think about. Like sometimes, like, one thing I was thinking about, and this is going into like different schooling options, right? Each one, like, because I had this thought, I'll get personal. Deacon's going to start school soon. And, we're talking about all the different options, right? So like there's pros and cons to both. And I was thinking, well, one thought I did have is, man, it'd be easier for him to go to public school to start, because he can be there learning, we're working, we'll have two other kids at home, and it'll be easier. But then I got convicted too, because it's like, well, just because it's easier doesn't mean it's better. Not saying we won't put him in public school, but it's just, if that's my reasoning, because it's easier, that's probably not the best route to go, right? Like, is there other pros and benefits to that other than it being easier, than maybe trying to homeschool somehow, some way? But just things to like think about, like, are we doing it because it's easier? Or is it like, well, yes, it is easier, but also it's going to add this, this, and this, and this to our family because of XYZ. Okay. Maybe then that is a good option for you,
right?
Especially in that season, whatever's going on. So it's just kind of bringing that thought process forward to looking at these conveniences that we're using, and also saying like, well, if this was taken away from me, what would happen? Could I survive without it?
Yeah. Because I think conveniences are kind of they're just making us weak in a sense, and I think if they're making us weak, then I don't think they're okay. Here, I think a convenience is a tool.
Yeah.
I think a convenience should be a tool.
Yes.
So whatever that convenience is, I mean, I can't name them all. For
know.
me, it was my smartphone,
Right.
and TV,
Right.
and entertainment, and all that jazz.
Yeah.
But whatever that convenience is, it should be a tool. But we all know that these things are not tools anymore. These things are normal life, normal life, right? And there is this worship portion that's going on with it now, and I think that a lot of people don't really think about that.
Yeah.
I don't think they think, wait, hang on a second, I can't remember anything. You know what I mean? And for me, it was looking around, just like instead of whenever you feel uncomfortable or whenever you whatever it is, don't look down and pull out your phone and scroll through meaningless nothingness. Look around and look at people, because they're all doing that.
They're all doing that. Yeah, and you could miss your opportunities to minister to somebody. Like, what if the Lord wants you to talk to somebody and you don't? Which, I mean, I've been guilty of doing that.
For sure.
So it's just keeping that in mind, for sure.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up. I wanted to kind of finish, which I kind of said earlier, but just with this final question, to kind of think about when you're talking about these conveniences between you and the Lord, between you and your spouse, or whoever's involved, have those discussions like, is this something we can do? But I wanted to just leave with this one question. Do you have the time and or the resources to do it the hard way versus the easy way? And if so, is this something that would benefit your family in the long run? In the sense of like, if we do it the harder way, what does that bring to our family versus if we just take the easy route? And like weigh those pros and cons of like, well, is this something that we want for our family? Want our children to learn? Is this going to benefit us because we're going to be learning this and this and this? Or, maybe it's not feasible. Maybe it's not. You're like, no, I think this is a place where we can keep the convenience, but let's use our time and resources over here where it is going to be harder, more challenging, but that's a sacrifice we want to make because it's going to bring this to our family. So just to think, and it's seasonal too, also keep that in mind. There's no right or wrong way necessarily. It's just thinking about it and making sure we're not just all floating down the path of life, and that we're actually working towards eternity and building things up for the kingdom.
Yep. I also wanted to bring up sorry, I know you were ending it with that question, but that book that you had,
yes, it's called Hard is Not
Hard
the Same as Bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And again, back to the sanctification portion of it, of like, we are being built up.
Yes.
Hebrews 5 says that Jesus learned obedience through his suffering. Like through the suffering that he faced on the cross, he learned that obedience.
Yes.
God manifested in the flesh, learned obedience.
Right.
So now we take joy in suffering along with him.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, American suffering is completely different. But it's still there. It's still issues.
People still go through hard stuff.
Exactly. So it's like everything that, and again, it's not seeking after the inconvenience or seeking after this thing that is just obviously harder.
Right.
But in these kind of seasons of working maybe a little bit more, or whether that's gardening or whatever it is, or putting down your phone,
right,
like filling that time in with actual work, it does build us. It's making us stronger, you know what I mean? And it's bringing us to that ultimate goal of reflecting him.
I just feel too the need to say, like, when we're talking about Americans kind of don't understand hardship. Listen, I know that people go through hard things in America.
For sure.
What we're talking about is we can freely talk about these things without worrying about the government literally killing us and our children. We don't have to worry about being bombed in the middle of the night, so those are the hard things, like we're able to go to church on a Sunday freely without worrying about going to prison for the rest of our life, or again, like I said, being killed. Those are what we're talking about with the hardships, right? If it came down to that, how many people would still be going to church on a Sunday? probably not very many people, right? You know, because the path is narrow, you know? And so it's just like, okay, if it ever got to that point, I'm not saying it will, but if it ever did get to that point, which reading the book of Revelations, it kind of sounds like it's going to, right? And I've heard a lot of people say, and I mean, obviously you read it, America's not in the book of Revelation, so where did we go? Well, let people think about that. But I'm saying, like, if we did get to that point, would we still be on the narrow path, or would we just give everything to follow the temporal and completely throw away our inheritance? Like Esau.
It's all about the soup.
All about the soup. So, see, again, temptation with the food. That's the beginning. Hello, why didn't we even think of that? But anyway, we hope that this made sense, and we hope it kind of brought some questions to mind for you guys. And, you know, like I say, bring it before the Lord. There's no condemnation for those who believe. So, you know, if you're having any condemning thoughts, we rebuke that in Jesus' name, because you just bring it before the Lord and you say, is there something that I'm doing that we shouldn't be? Maybe he's trying to lead you to do something that's a little bit harder, more challenging, but in the long run it'll benefit you guys and your walk with him, and you'll understand him more, you know, and that's the whole point. Amen. So we love you guys. Thank you as always for your encouragement, and God bless. Yeah, God bless. We hope to see you next time.